A cold sweat prickled my skin as my hand trembled, scrolling through the browser history. Karen, my wife, had been searching for things unsettling, to say the least. 4:34 p.m. How to stop your husband from cheating. I had barely finished dragging the tab closed when that line appeared. Fear, cold and sharp, punched the air from my lungs. I frantically checked my zipper, my gaze locked on the screen. Amy and I, we were always careful. Never a touch in front of Karen. Never a word spoken too intimately. There was no way she could know, not even from my phone. Every picture, every sweet nothing from Amy, deleted. Phone calls only. Amy, the new hire. Vibrant, alluring, a whirlwind of energy that drew every eye and set every male heart racing. I tried to ignore it at first, even ducked out early to avoid her. But her laugh, that melodic ripple, it got to me. 4:37 p.m. How much does a divorce cost? A bead of sweat rolled down my temple. Divorce? Karen wanted a divorce? Why? 4:39 p.m. Why do humans have emotions? My lips tightened. If she did know, the pain must be unbearable. This morning I woke up late to a note on the table. Gone to the market. Don't wake up. I meant to call her. A warm drop of blood splattered on the keyboard, snapping me out of my thoughts. Blood. I glanced at the ceiling. Nothing. A metallic tang filled my nostrils. I brought my hand to my face. A smear of crimson stained my palm. Panicked, I stumbled to the bathroom, clutching my nose. Once the bleeding stopped, I returned to the computer. 4:44 p.m. What part of the brain is responsible for love? This was strange. Karen never cared for science, for biology. Was this someone else's search history? Was the computer hacked? No, everything was normal. Karen's smiling face greeted me from the login screen. So why was she searching for things about the brain? 4:49 p.m. What is excerebration? Excerebration? Some new divorce term? Curiosity, morbid and immediate, had me clicking the link. I wanted to know what Karen was planning. I wish I hadn't. The search results loaded, and my stomach churned. Gruesome images made me want to retch, but it was a bolded paragraph that snagged my attention. An ancient practice involving the chiseling of the nasal bone to extract the brain. My heart hammered against my ribs. My finger hovered over the back button, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I clicked through the history, each line more terrifying than the last. 5:01 p.m. Can humans live without a hypothalamus? 5:05 p.m. Location of hypothalamus. 5:11 p.m. How much temazepam is safe to consume? Goosebumps prickled my skin, but I couldn't look away. I was so consumed by the horror unfolding on the screen that I didn't hear Karen come home. Honey? I'm back. My voice caught in my throat. What could I say? How could I ask her about this? Honey? Karen called again, the click of her heels getting closer. Yeah, I choked out, shoving the box of tissues into the drawer. What's up? Just me. Karen smiled, peering at the doorway. You okay? You look like you had one too many last night. I stammered. Did I? Karen's brow furrowed, her gaze lingering on me, as if unsure if I was joking. What is all this? I asked, gesturing at the computer screen. Karen stepped closer, her eyes scanning the monitor. What do you mean? I pointed. my hand shaking at the browser history. "Oh," Karen blushed. "You said we could try it, so I was doing some research." "Try what? Try what?" I was lost. "You know, the exy thingy. You're the doctor. I thought you'd know better than me." The blood in my veins turned to ice. Excerebration. "Karen, what have you done?" Before she could answer, a warm gush of blood erupted from my nose. Karen stared, her face draining of color. "What?" A small, fleshy lump dislodged from my nostril, landing on my shirt. We both stared at it in horror. Karen screamed, spinning on her heels, but I grabbed her, pinning her against the wall. "Tell me what you've done." Karen struggled, but I held her fast. Blood trickled down her chin, staining her blouse crimson. "Dee, don't you remember?" Karen cried, pushing against me. "Don't you remember what you did?" I searched her terrified face, desperately trying to recall the events of the previous night. "No. What did I do?" You came home from work and told me you were leaving me for Amy," Karen sobbed. "You said you didn't want to love her anymore, but you did." I stood there, blood soaking into the carpet. Amy. The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it. I couldn't picture a face. "Amy who?" I asked, my head spinning. "Amy who?" Karen shrieked. "The woman you've been seeing for the past 6 months. I haven't," I stammered, my entire body trembling. "I don't remember." Karen looked at me, her blood-soaked blouse a macabre shroud. What's happening to me?" I whispered. Karen was silent for a moment, tears streaming down her face. "Honey, what if I went too far with your hippocampus?" "Hippocampus? What the hell is that?" I yelled, the words echoing in the silence. "Honey," Karen cried, You're a doctor. It's the part of the brain that stores memories." The realization hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, frozen, trapped in a nightmare of my own making, or rather, of my wife's making. My wife, in a jealous rage, had lobotomized me, and the only evidence was the horrifying search history on the computer screen. The nightmare began with an online survey, a lifeline for a man cast adrift in the abyss of despair. Fired after a decade of servitude, only to witness his girlfriend hand in hand with his replacement, he found solace in cheap whiskey and the faint hope of online gigs. "Life's a cruel joke," he muttered, the words swallowed by the silence of his empty apartment. Applications littered the floor, each rejection a fresh wound on his already battered soul. Online surveys promising a paltry $5 gift card became his temporary salvation. 5 hours of monotonous questions earned him $45 and a sense of weary resignation. It was $9 an hour, a far cry from his former life, but it kept him afloat. As he was about to slam his laptop shut and seek refuge in the bottom of a bottle, a small, stark ad caught his eye. On a pristine white background, the words "Cash Survey" blazed in an unsettling black font. "At least they're up front," he thought, a humorless chuckle escaping his lips. "One more can't hurt. Maybe I'll earn enough for another drink." He clicked the link, bracing himself for an onslaught of tedious questions. The first few were standard. Name, age, occupation. It struck him as odd, when they asked for his height and weight, but he shrugged it off. Then came the first real question, the one that stopped his blood cold. On a scale of 1 to 5, how strong is your urge to look behind you right now? 5 options ranged from not at all to extremely strong. There was no logical reason to be afraid, yet fear coiled around him like a serpent. His breath hitched in his throat as he strained to hear any sound behind him. Silence. A full 5 minutes ticked by before he could even bring himself to turn around. Nothing. He exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping his lips. Just a stupid joke. Still, he found himself drawn forward, selecting moderate, before moving on to the next question. Why do you want to look behind you? He scoffed, a flicker of morbid amusement stirring within him. Interesting. He typed, I don't know, and continued. The third question appeared. You are on a plane. There is one other passenger somewhere behind you. When you get up to use the restroom, you notice the man is gone. You check the only restroom on the plane, but he isn't there. What do you do? Again he stared at the screen, a wave of dizziness washing over him. What kind of personality test was this? He typed, I don't know once more. It was the truth. How could he possibly answer that? He clicked on, a strange compulsion driving him forward. The fourth question. You wake up in a strange forest. It's pitch black, except for a faint moon above. About 30 feet away, there is a small wooden house with a faint light emanating from within. The door is wide open, and a woman is smiling and waving for you to come in. Do you enter? Explain why. This wasn't any weirder than the last question, so his personality test theory seemed valid. He thought for a moment, typing that he'd go inside because there was nowhere else to go. He clicked continue. He shouldn't have. The questions took a turn, not toward the grotesque or obscene, but toward something far stranger, more psychologically unsettling. He couldn't explain why he continued, only that he felt inexplicably compelled to do so. Some questions lingered in his mind long after he'd read them. Let's say you wake up one night and find an elevator in your home. At midnight each night afterward, it opens for 5 minutes, revealing a duplicate of yourself, increasingly injured as the nights go by. Do you continue living as you are? Or do you get in the elevator one time and end it all? And you're in a hotel room when you're awoken by frantic knocking on your window. You look through the blinds to see a man with no eyes. He presses his mouth against the glass and tells you to kill the woman in your bathroom right now. Do you listen to him? And the most disturbing of all, you're watching home videos with your mom. One of them includes footage of her being murdered by a masked intruder. She only laughs and says nothing when she watches it. In your opinion, is this cause for concern? Alongside the increasingly bizarre questions, strange occurrences began to bleed into his reality. There was a knock at his door. Through the peephole, he saw a man standing there, shaking his head vigorously, mouthing the word no, his eyes wide with a terror he couldn't comprehend. He didn't open the door. His phone rang incessantly, the caller ID flashing surveyor. Each time, it went to voicemail, but the messages were just garbled whispers interspersed with static. In retrospect, he realized they sounded more like screams. An hour bled into the next, his mind on the verge of snapping. He was afraid to look behind him, even though there was no indication anything was there. He heard scratching coming from the air vent and dragged the sofa over to block it. Finally, he reached the last question of the survey, but it wasn't a question at all. It was a statement. Don't let them in. Don't trust them. As he read the words, he heard another knock at the door. He crept towards it and peered through the peephole. This time, it was a woman, maybe in her mid-20s, wearing a heavy coat despite the summer heat. She wore sunglasses, obscuring her gaze. She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket and slipped it through the mail slot. He bent down to read it. It's lying. Get out of the apartment now. 30 minutes passed. He couldn't bring himself to look at the computer screen or the woman outside. She was still there. He could see the shadow of her feet from under the door. He had heard his bedroom window slide open a while ago, but he had barricaded the door with his dresser. Now he heard distorted whispers coming from behind it. Maybe the abyss wasn't so bad after all. But what was he supposed to do? The sky pulsed with a sickly, flickering red, like someone waving a flare from the cosmos. Faint, yet undeniable. We laughed, joking about UFOs as we set up camp. I was certain there were 5 of us, close friends since middle school, celebrating graduation with a camping trip. The crimson glow vanished unnoticed as we chatted and wrestled with tent poles. Dave finished his tent first and volunteered to gather firewood. I remembered working alongside him last year at a desolate gas station. Those late-night shifts were strangely more bearable with him around. Eric fumbled with the tent instructions, his signature round glasses magnifying his anxious blinking. I wasn't particularly close to Eric, just remembered sharing a desk with him in math class, copying his homework. Ava and Sally, my cousins, were tackling their tent together. I knew everyone in the group intimately, even Ava's little brother who always begged to tag along. I reiterate all this because I was certain there were 5 of us, and I knew each one of them. Dave went off for firewood while we arranged our folding chairs around the fire pit. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest began to swallow the light, a creeping unease settled in. Shadows stretched and warped with each passing minute. Eric fetched flashlights while we wondered aloud about Dave's prolonged absence. The rustling of undergrowth heralded his return. By then we were huddled in our chairs, jackets zipped tight. The temperature had plummeted, a biting wind picking up. "Geez, couldn't even save me a seat?" Dave quipped, dumping the wood by the fire pit. There were 5 chairs arranged. I tried to rationalize it, but my mind felt submerged in water. Everything was crystal clear until that moment, but when I tried to focus on why there were 5 occupied chairs when Dave hadn't sat down, my mind stalled, like something was slithering in and sucking the thoughts away. A primal, visceral unease gripped me. The forest fell unnervingly silent. I glanced around, seeing the same disquiet etched on the others' faces. Eric fidgeted, picking at his fingers, his eyes darting around as if searching for the 6th person, but finding nothing. I looked at each face, all pinched with a growing dread, except, "It's fine. I'll grab another chair," Dave said, breaking the silence and somehow diffusing the tension. I stood up, offering to help him. Dave met my eyes and nodded. We walked towards the tents, but I kept my eyes glued to the group. "How many people are here?" I whispered to Dave as he looked around and realized we only brought 5 chairs. In fact, everyone brought their own chair. They were quite heavy, and we wouldn't have brought an extra for no reason. 5? I mean, there are 5 chairs, Dave replied, his voice shaky. "No, I just thought maybe someone forgot to bring theirs," I said. My mind was struggling to confront the problem, and now grasping for reasonable excuses. I wasn't in control of my own thoughts anymore. It felt like swimming through a dream, and if I tried to force myself to think about the sixth person, my head would start to throb. "Yeah, that makes sense," Dave said, relaxing and turning back towards the group. When we returned to the fire pit, 2 chairs were empty, one for me and one for Dave. It all made sense now, even though we all agreed it hadn't before. Sally suggested that maybe we were all tired from the long hike and just needed some sleep. She might have been right. We were all sleep deprived from waking up so early this morning to make it here on time. Ava brought out the drinks. All 6 cans were already opened. We huddled around the crackling fire for warmth, sipping our drinks and reminiscing about the past year. Ava was mid-story about being home alone and the strange things that happened when a shiver ran down my spine despite the comforting warmth of the campfire. The cozy, safe feeling vanished as I realized a crucial detail I'd missed. "Who started the fire?" I asked, cutting Ava off mid-sentence and interrupting everyone's train of thought. Everyone looked annoyed for a fleeting moment, until they realized they didn't have an answer. Again, I looked at the faces staring back at me, all pale with fear, barely visible in the firelight. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric asked. Dave shook his head. "I think the person behind Jenny did," Sally said, looking behind me. I snapped my head around so fast it sent a jolt of pain through my neck. My heart hammered against my ribs. Behind me was nothing but the encroaching darkness of the forest. Staring into the rows of dark, looming trees made me feel exposed. I felt like a lone bird in a vast field. "Wait, I don't know," Sally said. Her eyes were wide and visibly shaking. She continued to look around frantically as Ava moved closer, putting a hand on her shoulder and trying to comfort her. "I think we should leave," Ava stammered. "Yeah, something's not right, but I can't put my finger on it," Dave said. "But it's pitch black out there. We'll get lost if we go now." Another voice chimed in. "Yeah, I think we should stay the night and leave as soon as it's light out," Eric agreed. I was about to protest, but realized Eric was right. The forest was shrouded in thick darkness, making navigation near impossible. "Let's not sleep in separate tents just to be safe," Sally said. We all agreed. We only brought single-person tents, but we could squeeze 2 people in if we tried. That way, no one would be alone at night. After that conversation, we all got up and paired off. I went with Dave. Sally, as always, went with Ava. Eric kept complaining that he didn't have anyone to pair up with, but we reassured him that he did. He wouldn't accept it. I felt like there was a moment where all of us realized there were only 5 of us, and suddenly, we were all huddled together in the middle of the clearing. "Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us here?" Eric asked. Sweat beaded on his face despite the cold. We almost left him alone, thinking there was someone else. My stomach churned as I closed my eyes and tried to recall everyone here. My head throbbed, but I pushed through. "There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and..." I pointed at each person as I said their names. I retched violently as I finished saying Sally's name. It felt like a dagger was being driven into the left side of my head. My vision blurred. Dave held me up so I wouldn't collapse, and we all silently moved towards the tents as someone put out the fire. Dave helped me into the tent, while the 4 outside discussed what to do. I could only focus on snippets of the conversation, as waves of intense pain pulsed through my head. Sally came up with the brilliant idea of arranging the 3 tents together so that the doorways faced each other in a U shape so we could be as close as possible and also limit the entrances to the tents. Dave was about to go out and help, but I grabbed his hand and begged him to stay with me. Arranging the tents took a while. I started to feel better once everyone had settled into their tents. A quick head count confirmed there were 5 of us. Eric would have to sleep alone in his tent, but he was more comfortable now that all the tents were so close together. Thinking back now, I think he was just trying to be brave for us. I deeply regret that moment, letting him sleep alone in his tent. He was always the least integrated into our group, and knew none of us wanted to pair up with him. Right before we went to sleep, we all agreed to leave as soon as the sun came up in the morning. I remember taking one last look out at the woods before trying to fall asleep. The wind picked up, gently swaying the branches. Beyond our clearing was only dense blackness. It felt like the trees were closing in on me. Under the faint moonlight illuminating the clearing, I turned my head to look at the other 2 tents and saw someone standing next to them. Despite everything, sleep came quickly and easily. Ava's blood-curdling scream woke me in the middle of the night. Dave and I scrambled out of our tent and saw Sally and Ava staring at Eric's tent. We pushed past them. Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up. He was still inside it. His head was in the middle, face contorted in unimaginable agony. The rest of his body was wrapped around it, the blue fabric now dripping with black blood. Dave zipped the tent closed. Ava was in shock. Her eyes were vacant and lifeless. Sally kept shaking her, tears streaming down her face. Dave grabbed the flashlight and yelled for us to get up and run. We left the campsite behind and entered the trail we'd hiked in on. The 5 of us huddled together, Dave leading the way, shining his weak flashlight on the path so we could see. All we had to guide us through this 2-hour trail was a small circle of white light. Even the moon couldn't penetrate the dense canopy. Ava tripped, twisting her ankle. We stopped. Someone said they knew how to splint it so we could keep going. Instead, they pulled her into the woods. It happened so fast, none of us had time to react. Sally started to run after Ava when Dave held her back. She wrestled free and ran into the woods after Ava's screams. I was about to run after her when Dave grabbed my shoulder and shook me violently. "We have to leave, Jenny. Please," he said. I hesitated but started running again when Sally's screams abruptly stopped. She had been calling out Ava's name as she ran after her. Dave and I continued running on the trail, trying to get to the car so we could get out of here. We couldn't do anything else. At one point, there were 3 of us running down the trail, Dave and I side by side, while someone followed closely behind. "Dave, who's behind us?" I gasped, my lungs burning. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest and my legs were on fire. He looked back at me. A look of confusion turned to fear, then to anger. "Just keep running," he told me while pulling out a pocket knife from his pants. He handed me the car keys, which I almost dropped. Then he abruptly turned around and lunged at whoever was behind us. I kept running in terror as the sounds of a struggle echoed behind me. I tripped and tumbled down the trail for what felt like an eternity. I didn't allow myself to stop. I almost cried when the trail ended and I emerged into the familiar parking lot. Not wasting a second, I ran to the car, started it, and sped out of that forest onto the highway in seconds. I'm typing this post at a rest stop. My phone finally has service again, and I've called 911 to try and explain the situation. I don't think they believed my story, but they sent a car to my location anyway. While I wait, the sun has finally begun to rise. After I post this, I'm going to check why the person in my back seat has been so quiet this whole time. "15 years I spent in the belly of that sun-baked hellhole in southern Arizona, witnessing horrors the human mind was never meant to comprehend. The prison walls didn't just hold back men. They contained a hunger, a primal fear given flesh and bone. They called it the Skinwalker. It began as a whisper, a chilling legend passed between inmates in hushed tones, barely audible above the clanging bars and the muffled sobs of the damned. One morning, during the usual head count, a guard stumbled upon something unspeakable in a solitary confinement cell. It wasn't the hardened criminal meant to be there, but another man entirely, wearing the inmate's skin like a macabre, ill-fitting suit, the flesh pallid and slick with a viscous sheen. There was no record of this imposter, no clue how he breached the impenetrable fortress. The inmate whose skin he wore, gone, vanished without a trace. The Skinwalker. The name alone became a curse, a specter haunting the prison's corridors, seeping into every crack and crevice. But it wasn't just a story, a campfire tale to scare new fish. Old Carl, a Navajo lifer with eyes that seemed to pierce the veil of reality, claimed the Skinwalker was real, lurking within the prison walls, choosing its next victim like a butcher eyeing a side of beef. Carl said it could mimic voices, copy mannerisms to a T, but it couldn't hide its true nature. There was a stiffness to its movements, an unnatural gait, as if the body was a puppet and the strings were pulled by something monstrous. And those eyes, cold, reptilian, devoid of any warmth, reflecting the abyss that stared back from within. He believed the Skinwalker walked among them, disguised, waiting. He called it a master of flesh, able to blend in so seamlessly it could fool even the most discerning eye. It could be anyone, he'd say, a guard, a cook, even the chaplain offering false hope on Sundays. The curse of the Skinwalker settled over the prison like a shroud. Unexplained deaths, strange noises that set teeth on edge, and fleeting shadows in the dead of night only solidified the terror that clung to the air like the stench of sweat and despair. When darkness fell and swallowed the cell blocks whole, the true horror would begin. Guttural sounds, like pigs being slaughtered, punctuated by the scrape of flesh on cold concrete, echoed through the halls. Footstep, hurried and uneven, a presence darting just out of sight, always just out of sight, but you could feel its hot, fetid breath on the back of your neck. I saw it drive men mad, these hardened criminals, reduced to quivering wrecks, their eyes wide and unseeing, acting erratically, muttering to themselves, then disappearing without a word. They would grow quiet, withdrawn, avoiding eye contact, as if afraid of what they might see reflected back, until one day they were simply gone, transferred without explanation. Or maybe their skin was just a little too loose that morning, their smiles a little too wide, their eyes empty. Even I, a man who had stared into the abyss for 15 years, wasn't immune to the creeping dread. The constant fear became a dull ache behind my eyes, a knot of tension in my gut that never quite untied. A week before my release, my cellmate, a man I thought I knew, a man who had shared his meager meals and whispered confessions in the dark, changed. He grew quiet, sullen, his gaze lingering on me with an unsettling intensity, like a starving man eyeing a steak. One night, I woke with a gasp, a cold sweat clinging to me like a second skin. He was halfway through the bars, contorting his body through the impossible space, his bones cracking and reforming, a grotesque parody of a smile twisting his lips. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it was just another nightmare in this waking hellscape. But when I opened them again, he was gone, and the faint scent of decay lingered in the air. The day I walked free should have been a victory, a chance to forget, to breathe air untainted by fear and despair. But as I glanced back at the looming structure, I knew some horrors stay with you, etched onto the very fabric of your being, woven into the marrow of your bones. The air outside hung thick and heavy, the sun a blazing inferno that did little to dispel the chill that had burrowed deep inside me. 15 years I had spent in that hellhole, but my mind was still trapped within its walls, haunted by the skinwalker's vacant stare. My feet dragged against the dusty earth, the prison's shadow stretching out like a monstrous claw, raking at the clear blue sky, trying to pull me back into its grasp. I glanced back, a shiver crawling down my spine, turning my blood to ice water. The iron gates clanged shut, a final resounding boom that echoed in the silence, sealing in the countless souls in their torment. Or maybe it was sealing me out. I thought of Carl, the old Navajo with eyes that saw too much, who had warned me about the skinwalker. It wasn't just a creature, he'd said, his voice raspy and low, like the rustle of dry leaves. It was a presence that lived within us all. The more we feared it, the stronger it became. Would its curse follow me? Would it haunt me for the rest of my days, a chilling reminder of the darkness I had witnessed? Was it already too late? In the empty yard, I saw Carl's face, etched into my mind, his features shifting, his skin crawling, his eyes burning with an unholy light. He stood there, solitary and silent, a phantom born of my fear, or maybe something more. His smile, a grotesque mockery, threatened to swallow me whole, drag me back into the abyss. I turned and walked faster, putting as much distance between me and the prison as possible, but each step sent a jolt of fear through me. The skinwalker was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. And I knew, deep down, that some horrors could never be outrun. They could only be survived, one terrifying moment at a time. My sleep paralysis. Demon. Turns out to be a pretty chill guy. My first memory of sleep paralysis was when I was 10 years old. I remember it vividly because that was the night my parents took me to see Shrek 2 as a reward for getting good grades on my report card. We got home late after the evening show, and Mom tucked me straight into bed. Around 4 a.m. I woke up, the light from my alarm clock telling me the time. I couldn't feel anything, no sensation of my pajamas against my skin, or the warmth of my pillow. My arms and legs had feeling, but they felt heavy, as if some terrible weight was pressing down on them. I tried to call out, but couldn't. My voice caught in my throat, my lips unmoving. I managed only a feeble moan that sounded like a cross between a frog's croak and a zombie's groan. I thought I was dead, that this is what death feels like, being awake but unable to move or tell anyone. My mind wrestled with the thought of being placed in a coffin, unable to tell anyone I was still alive, unable to move or make a sound, as the lid closed and they buried me in the ground, still living. My fear subsided as I felt my heart pounding in my chest from the near panic attack. I also became aware of my breathing, slowing as the fear dissipated. I calmed a little, thinking it must just be a dream. That's when I saw him for the first time. Mr. Brown's stick legs. He was huddled in the corner of the room by my closet. His oversized red eyes glowed in the darkness of my bedroom. His face was like a porcelain mask, white, expressionless, with no mouth or nose, just those two haunting red eyes. When he stood up, his body unfolded like origami until his head touched the ceiling. His neck bent, tilting forward as his true height was greater than the room. His long black torso was covered in shimmering symbols that reflected red in the light of his glowing eyes. He stood on two spindly, thin legs that disappeared into the room's shadows. He made no sound as he moved, seeming to glide as he approached my bed. His long, thin arms reached down towards me as I moaned through paralyzed lips. I couldn't scream, though I very much wanted to. His fingers reached through the darkness, down to my face. Two pointed fingertips touched against my eyelids, pushing them closed. I remember his fingertips feeling cool but not cold. Though the ends of his fingers looked sharp, his touch was gentle. "Do not struggle, little one. Sleep, sleep," he said. His voice was so deep I could feel it in my chest when he spoke. I did as instructed, convincing myself it truly was a dream. Even if it wasn't, the backs of my eyelids were more reassuring than gazing into those piercing red eyes in his vacant mask of a face. I shut my eyes, wanting it to be a dream, willing it to be a dream. I woke the next morning, thankfully able to move, walk, and talk. I told my parents what I saw, and they both agreed it was a dream. Mom tried to float the idea that something from Shrek 2 had scared me, but neither Dad nor I bought it. For confirmation, Dad asked me to draw a picture of what I saw. As I was drawing, I ran out of black crayon and had to finish his legs with the next darkest color in my crayon box. "Hey there, Mr. Brownstick Legs," my dad said as I handed him the drawing. "You leave my daughter alone now, you hear?" This is how my sleep paralysis demon ended up with the name Mr. Brownstick Legs. Giving him a silly name helped take some of the edge off going to bed the following night. Dad even did a sweep of the room, calling out for him. "Here, Mr. Brownstick Legs," he said, whistling as if calling a dog. It made me giggle, and the whole episode felt more fun than scary. But once they tucked me in and turned off the light, I felt the dread creeping back in. Darkness hits harder when you expect to find something lurking in the shadows. I don't know how long I searched, but eventually I fell asleep. In the following weeks, I searched for Mr. Brownstick Legs every night as I fell asleep. Even when I went to sleepovers, I would do a cursory check in case he tagged along to a friend's house. As time passed, my searches became less frequent. It was a couple months later, the night before my first day of 5th grade, when I woke to find Mr. Brownstick Legs straddled over my bed, his blank plate of a face inches from my own. A scream stuck in my throat, coming out sounding like a gush of air releasing from a pool float. "Hush, child," he said. His voice was deep, echoless. I didn't know how he spoke without a mouth, but I heard him nonetheless. I saw he held a piece of paper in his thin fingers, crumpled at the edges and torn. He held it up to show me. On the page was a pink blob with blue dots for eyes and a droll red smile with stick lines for legs and arms. It was lying on a blue rectangle. "I found the picture you drew of me, so I drew a picture of you," he said. "Do you like it?" I tried nodding, but couldn't move. I tried answering, but all that came out was the same dry croaking sound. "Will you draw another one for me? I so liked the first one. You gave me pants. I look good in pants." Again, I was unable to respond or move to give him an answer. He must have been able to read my intent because he tucked the picture under my pillow before closing my eyes again. When I woke the next morning, I bolted upright and tossed my pillow off the bed. My heart leapt into my throat when I found the picture. It wasn't a dream. He was real. I went to my desk and began drawing a picture for him, starting with his face and eyes, trying to capture as much detail as I could remember. I had forgotten all about the first day of school until Mom opened my door and found me still in my pajamas. "Lexi," she yelled, startling me as I was coloring in his eyes. "Your bus will be here in less than an hour. Get dressed now." I tucked my picture into my school backpack and got dressed. I finished my drawing at recess that day, using my brand new Crayola 64 pack that I got with my back-to-school supplies. I gave him blue pants this time, figuring he'd like to see himself in jeans. I wrote his name, Mr. Brown Sticklegs, at the bottom of the picture and drew a smiley face next to it, hoping he'd like his nickname. I flipped the paper over to write him a message on the back. I wanted to ask him questions, but didn't want to anger him since he visited me when I was at my most vulnerable. I wrote out my letter on a separate piece of paper before copying it over to the back of my picture. "Dear Mr. Brown Sticklegs," that's your name. "My name is Lexi. I am in the 5th grade. What is your real name? How old are you? Do you go to school? Why do you visit my bedroom? Why can I move when you visit? You look scary, but you also seem nice. I hope we can be friends. Love, Lexi. P.S. I hope you like your blue pants." I added another smiley face at the end of the letter, my final emphasis on wanting to be friends. I considered closing with "sincerely," but figured love was a better, friendlier choice. I tucked the picture under my pillow that night, now anxious to see him rather than filled with dread of his reappearance. But like last time, he did not return the next day, or the day after. Days stretched into weeks, and every morning I found the picture tucked under my pillow from the night before. It wasn't until Thanksgiving break that I saw him again. My eyes opened as the morning sun poked through the blinds of my bedroom. His body didn't look any different in the light. In fact, his black skin seemed darker, absorbing the sun's rays without giving anything back. His eyes seemed wider than before. If he had a mouth, I would have figured he was smiling. In his slender fingers was the picture I drew for him. "Hello, Lexi," he said. "Thank you for the picture. I do look good in blue pants." I wanted to smile, but, well, sleep paralysis. He flipped the picture over to the side with my letter. "I will answer your questions the best I can. I do not have a name, not one you could ever pronounce, but I am happy for you to call me Mr. Brown Sticklegs. As for my age, I exist outside the construct of time. Therefore, I am ageless. I do not go to school, nor do I know what school is. Why do I visit you? I visit to feed on the energy of your soul." My breath quickened as a mute groan exited my teeth. I wanted to run, wanted to get away from him, but I was pinned down, unable to move. He sensed my uneasiness and tried to calm me by patting my forehead. "Let me explain. Have you been to the ocean? It appears vast, almost limitless as you stare out at the blue water, with no visible land on the other side." In my mind, I was standing on a beach. I felt the salty ocean breeze against my face as I looked out over the massive body of water. Waves crashed at my feet. I felt the rush of water over them, followed by the trickle of sand and pebbles as the water drew back. Your soul is like an ocean, child. Vast, limitless, undefinable by words to your understanding. I take only a tiny sip. A single glass of water from a vast ocean. I am not one who could consume an entire ocean. Dark clouds formed over the water as I stared at the white-capped waves. The clouds unleashed a heavy downpour, turning the horizon gray as rain fell from the sky over the ocean. Just as the rain falls over the ocean, your soul can replenish itself by more than I could ever consume, not even in 1,000 of your years. Does that make you feel better? On the beach in my mind's vision, I nodded. In my bedroom, he nodded back at me. Good. As for your last question, why you cannot move, we are meeting at a point outside your time where your world and mine touch. Your physical body cannot move here, but if you persist, you can learn to speak to me with your mind, and I will answer your questions in exchange for your drawings. You can draw pictures of whatever you like. I want to know more of your world. In my mind, I nodded again. This knowledge is a gift, so we can understand one another more. I am not one who would hurt you. He pressed his fingertip to my eyelids again, closing them. In my mind's eye, I was still on the beach, but the sun was setting, and no stars were visible through the rain. I drifted back to sleep to the sound of falling rain. The next morning, I asked my parents for a sketchbook and colored pencils. They tried to hold me off until Christmas, but since I spent most of my afternoons and weekends drawing pictures up in my room, Dad let me open one of my gifts a week early. A Strathmore sketchbook with 100 pages and a 50-pack of Crayola-colored pencils. I started by drawing the rest of my family. Mom, Dad, my little brother Tommy, our cat Libby, and even though he had died, our dog Pancakes. Next I drew our house, then our car, then my school. I kept drawing anything I could think of. Trees, birds, insects, until my sketchbook was full. I used my allowance to purchase more books so I could keep drawing. I honed my craft, redoing my earlier drawings in greater detail. My thoughts considered his wording. I am not one who could consume an entire ocean. I wanted to ask him if there were those who could, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to know such things. Mr. Brownstick-Legs didn't return until my freshman year of high school. To him, it wasn't like any time had passed. I read up on lucid dreaming in the time between visits, so that when he returned, I would be better capable of talking to him. He held my books in his hands, flipping through my drawings, doting over the increased refinement of my drawing skills. I had filled a dozen sketch pads and upgraded from Crayola to Prismacolor Premier pencils for my drawings. His biggest surprise was when, after he complimented my drawings, I spoke to him. "Thank you," I said, seeing the words in my mind as I spoke them aloud. If he had a surprised expression, his eyes showed it. "You have been very busy, child," he said. "Do you have any questions you would like to ask?" I hesitated, but finally formed the words in my mind. "Are there creatures who can consume an entire ocean?" He didn't respond right away, which made me think I had not asked properly. As I asked him a second time, he put a finger to my lips as if to shush me. "There are those who can. They are known as the Dark Ones. They are capable of consuming entire souls, emptying them out, leaving them dry and barren. You should not fear them, but you should also not provoke them." His eyes curved downward, as if concerned or afraid. "What do they look like?" I asked. In my mind, my visions were filled with images of great, terrible creatures, spiders taller than the Empire State Building, on thin, spindly legs of shadow and smoke. Tentacled monsters in the seas lofting blue whales like they were toys, ripping them to shreds with their curved, chitinous beaks. Great, ghastly flying creatures that knocked over orchards and forests with the beat of their leathery wings. I showed you only because you asked, Mr. Brown Sticklegs said, "but it is best that we don't talk or think about them. Let them be." I nodded in my mind. He leaned forward and pressed his plate-like face to my head as if to kiss me on the forehead, which was odd since he didn't have a mouth. Then, as usual, he closed my eyes, and I drifted back to sleep. My life took a downturn during the latter years of high school. My dad lost his job, and when the search for a new one dragged on, he turned to drinking to cope with his failure. He wasn't abusive, but he wasn't fun to be around either. In the months following, my parents would hush their arguing when I entered the room, greeting me with smiles as if nothing were wrong. That lasted until the day I came home from school to them fighting over a foreclosure notice from the bank. We moved out over a weekend from our home in the suburbs to an apartment on the other side of town. I internalized my feelings during that time. I withdrew from my friends and school activities besides the art club, the only one we could still afford. I saw my friends driving to school and hanging out while I rode the bus, too poor and too far out of the way to join in. My tastes began to change as well. Out was the bubblegum pop of Katy Perry, Kesha, and Taylor Swift. Instead, I listened to Pierce the Veil, Sleeping with Sirens, and Bring Me the Horizon. My clothes and makeup became darker, more black t-shirts and skirts with black eyeliner and black fingernail polish. Mom called it my goth phase, not that she understood. My drawings became darker too. I moved from colored pencils to charcoal, drawing skulls and gothic-looking cemeteries as my passion for drawing animals and flowers waned. I also drew the dark ones in great detail, exactly how I remembered them in my mind's eye. Mr. Brown Sticklegs visited me again a month after we moved into the apartment. He looked more at home in my room of blacklight posters and death metal bands than he did in my previous room. His eyes were dim, not the vibrant red as they were before. He stared at me as I lay in bed, unable to move. He moved inches from my face as I heard his words in my mind. "Your soul tastes different now." He didn't speak of my drawings. I worried that he might, especially since I had been drawing the dark ones. Not only drawing them, but thinking about them, and what type of damage they could do if they were to wake. He seemed sad for me, although reading his expression was difficult with no face. He patted my forehead like before, but didn't close my eyes before leaving as he used to. My life continued its spiraling path like a bottle rocket with a broken stick. My parents didn't talk outside of short conversations about which bills to pay and which ones to ignore. Each night, Dad disappeared into a bottle, while Mom disappeared online to chat with a male Facebook friend she knew from high school. The thing about rock bottom is that it's often a disguise for a trapdoor that drops you to an even lower depth than you thought possible. The first bottom came when my father died. Drove off the road into a gravel pit late at night with an empty bottle of bourbon in the passenger seat. I cried, but it felt hollow. I felt hollow. Even when Mom tried to hold me, I felt nothing inside, not sadness, not guilt, not anything. I disappeared into my sketchbooks, drawing even darker, more disturbing images. Death, dismemberment, vividly accurate vivisections of the cute animals I used to enjoy drawing. My friends no longer talked to me, which was fine, because I didn't want to talk to them anymore anyways. I found people to hang out with, not friends, but people who could get me access to moments of chemically induced euphoria to forget about life for a while. Just like that, the trapdoor opened, dropping me to a new rock bottom of addiction. One thing I had in common with my dad, but instead of falling into a bottle, I fell into a needle. I stole money from my mom's purse to feed my habits, not that she noticed. She was busy with her old Facebook friend, who had moved from online acquaintance to nightly sleepover companion. When the time came to begin my senior year, I didn't bother going back. I kept drawing, filling entire sketchbooks with the dark images that reflected my bleak outlook on life. The dark ones were prevalent subjects during this period of my life. I drew them feasting on humanity, raking flesh from bone in their jagged teeth behind lips of smoke. I came home one night to find my mom and her new male friend in the middle of a fight. It was different from her fights with Dad, more violent, more physical. When he raised his hand at me for trying to intervene, I decided it was time to bolt. I left home, hitching rides with anyone with a set of wheels I could manage to put up with for short periods of time. My preference leaned toward those with access to the chemical release I craved. The more I could numb, the more I could escape. I found certain drug combinations had similar effects to sleep paralysis, where my mind's ability to control my body's action became severed. In those moments of numbed paralysis, I'd see Mr. Brownstick-Legs watching from afar as I dulled the pain. I saw what I perceived as the dark ones too, but they weren't hiding in the shadows like Mr. Brownstick-Legs did. They were the shadows. I called out to them as well, for in those moments I wanted nothing more than to be hollowed out and empty. A void so dark no pain could ever penetrate it. When they didn't answer, I called out to Mr. Brownstick-Legs, but he would vanish every time. Perhaps it was all just a drug-fueled hallucination. Overdosing was never my intention. I was pushing too much, trying to find the edge of the void after feeling so low, so very low, searching for that something extra to filter out the background noise. I took it too far, giving myself a near-lethal dose. At one moment I was lying next to strangers on a stained mattress in an abandoned warehouse. Then came the initial rush of euphoric bliss. And then nothing. Whoever I was traveling with at the time dumped me on the curb in front of the ER, making me someone else's problem. This was my rock-bottom moment, although at the time it felt more like free fall. I spent 3 weeks in a coma. I was aware of my surroundings and could hear the doctors and nurses as they checked my vitals and tended to my cleanliness and upkeep, but I couldn't move or speak. At the end of my 3rd week in the ICU on a ventilator, I looked up to find Mr. Brownstick-Legs hovering over me, his round red eyes peering through the darkness. "What have you done to yourself, child?" His voice spoke inside my mind. In my mind, I was beside him, standing in the middle of a vast salt-flat desert. The ground was cracked and dry in a hexagonal pattern that stretched in all directions. "This is your soul now. There is nothing left to drink." I heard the beep of my heart rate monitor back in my hospital room speed up as fear entered my mind. "I called out to the dark ones," I said. "I asked for them to come. They emptied me out, emptied my soul. No, my child, you did this. You have not replenished, you have only consumed, and now nothing remains." I dropped to my knees in the middle of the salt as I felt a rumbling deep inside the hollow pit of my stomach. I leaned forward onto my arms, but they were no longer my arms. They were pitch black and empty. I could feel them, but when I looked at them, they were empty voids of smoke and shadow. I stood up on my legs, but they were no longer my legs. The darkness swirled up my torso and down my arms. The emptiness inside me consumed my entire body until only my head remained. What's happening to me? I heard a snap as my arms and legs split, forming 8 black, spindly, thin legs. I collapsed onto them, unable to support myself. Mr. Brownstick-Legs glided down in front of my face, his eyes inches from my own. "As I told you, child, only the dark ones have the ability to consume an entire ocean of a soul. That is your fate. That is what you will become. Back in the room, my heart rate monitor crashed to a flat line. I felt the cold darkness swirl up my neck to my head as the void consumed me. I was aware of the nurses and doctors huddled around my body, prepping the crash cart, but all I felt was the cold consuming what was left of me. "Help me," I uttered. "Please." My physical body jolted from the electric paddles, but I felt nothing, only the cold darkness. A needle injected into my IV line as they recharged for another burst of electricity. Still I felt nothing. Only cold, only darkness, only the vast emptiness of the void. Mr. Brown's stick legs tilted his head as he stared through his unblinking red eyes. He leaned forward, pressing his plate-like face to my forehead. I felt a vibration against my skin, followed by the tingling sensation of heat returning. The darkness receded back down my arms and legs. As he pulled back, the red in his eyes had diminished. A gift for the girl who gave me pants. A tear formed in my eye. It rolled down my cheek and fell onto the parked landscape below. Before I could say anything, an electronic jolt coursed through my body, pulling me away from the salt-flat expanse and back to my hospital room. The sinus rhythm of my heart rate monitor returned to normal. I felt the cool gel of the defibrillator paddles against my chest. I remember squeezing the hand of one of the attending nurses, who smiled down at me. "Look who's awake." I cried, but it was different than before. I felt the pain I had long been avoiding, but I felt something else as well. I felt grateful, and I felt a sense of hope I hadn't known in a long time. It was a long road back from the darkness, but the thing about the road to recovery is that, like a road, it leads to a destination. After years of listless drifting towards the void, having a destination was an important first step in finding self-love. I reconnected with my mother, who was struggling with her own form of the darkness. We leaned on one another, talking and going to therapy as we worked through the issues that drove us apart. After my release from the hospital, I moved back home with her Facebook friend long gone. I got my GED and used my many sketchbooks as a portfolio to get an apprenticeship at a tattoo parlor. I've been clean for 4 years now, and it feels good to smile again. Granted, I still prefer Pierce the Veil to anything from Katy Perry's catalog, and my tattoos and jewelry have more skulls than fluffy bunnies. But that's all on the surface. I no longer crave the darkness to consume me. I often think about the vision with Mr. Brown's stick legs on the salt flats that night in the hospital. I had not seen him since that night, and I often wonder about the state of my soul since that day. Has it replenished, or is it still the dried-up, barren wasteland that he took me to on that night? Last night, around 3 a.m, I finally got my answer. I woke up with a heaviness on my chest, arms, and legs. At first I felt the grips of fear grabbing hold, much like the first time I experienced it. But then in the dark corner of my room, I saw glowing red eyes staring back at me from the shadows. In spite of my sleep paralysis, couldn't help but smile when I heard his voice call out to me, "Child, your soul tastes much better now." Thank you for listening to this chilling tale. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more stories that will send shivers down your spine.